First thing we're going to start off with is a bowl with water, some modelling clay, and then a few sculpting tools. Now you can use pretty much anything for sculpting tools. If you only have kitchen utensils, you can use that as well. The edge of a spoon, you can't really get away with a fork, but you could use a butter knife if that's all that you have to hand. And we're going to start off with a little ball of clay. You're going to flatten it out as best you can. Use whatever you have to hand. I don't actually have a rolling pin, so I had to improvise. And then once you've flattened it out, what we're going to do is we're going to trim the edges. And yes, I didn't have a rolling pin, so I decided to improvise with a makeup brush that I actually use for my artwork now, for blending. And before I do anything else, I'm going to take a Tealight and I'm going to place this in the middle of the clay, just so that I know exactly where I have to work from. And then I'm going to cut it down, just so that the edges are a little bit more even. Once you've cut down the clay, I'm going to smooth down the edges, and I've pressed the Tealight into the clay so that there's a little bit of an indentation and I can see where I absolutely must not go that far, because we're going to need a minimum amount of space so that we can build up the flower around this. And to build up the flower, what we're going to do is we're going to roll out a line and then cut this into loads of little chunks and try and keep them even, so the same amount of distance, and do this with the whole roll. And then what we're going to do is with each individual little slice, we're going to be flattening it out between our fingers and turning it into a tiny little petal. I'm going to dip them into a bowl of water, hold them between my fingers, and then squeeze it into a petal shape and keep working that so that we get a slight raising right around our fingers. And then you're going to get this really lovely edge that otherwise is going to take you a while to build, but you can just use the natural shape of your fingers to build this. I'm going to make sure that the edge is very flat and smooth, and then I'm going to stick it in the side of the circle, and then with one of my little sculpting tools I'm just going to make sure that it's really nicely blended in. Now when you're doing this, make sure that the bottom of the lotus petal has been cut really sharply, because if there's any little bits and bobs of clay that's just sticking out, it's going to look messy and it's not going to stick very nicely. So cut out the bottom so it's flat, and then stick it to the circle. And we're going to blend the edges into the circle, and then once you've done the first layer, you want to go ahead, neaten up the edges, and then turn it over and do the same to the bottom, just so that it's really secure and it isn't going to fall off once it's dried later. The next part we're going to be doing exactly the same thing, except we're going to create a second layer, and these are going to overlap. So you want to do one petal and then put the next one to the side so that the edges overlap a little bit, and it's going to look a little bit like a cactus. And once you've done that, just press down a little bit, because the clay is going to have built up the Tealight a little bit, so you're going to want to wet your fingers and just smooth out the edges and make sure that the indentation in the middle is a little deeper. I'm going to make a little hole in the middle for an incense stick, but once it's dried I'm going to go ahead and paint it, and go ahead and paint it in whatever colour you want, it's entirely your choice. And now you can use it for a Tealight and an incense stick.